Picture this. You're huddled around a flickering fire 30,000 years ago, your stomach growling as the last of yesterday's mammoth meat disappears. Outside, saber-toothed cats prowl in darkness, their eyes reflecting your flames like deadly stars. The cave bear that claimed the neighboring shelter hasn't stopped growling for hours. And you? You're about to discover the secret that separates human survivors from human corpses in the Ice Age. What you sleep on tonight determines whether you wake up tomorrow. Forget everything Hollywood taught you about cavemen dragging knuckles and grunting. The archaeological evidence reveals something far more sophisticated, far more ingenious, and frankly, far more brutal than any movie dared imagine. Your ancestors weren't primitive brutes, they were survival engineers who turned the frozen wasteland into humanity's first luxury hotel. But here's what'll shock you. The difference between life and death often came down to 6 inches. 6 inches of carefully engineered bedding that could mean the difference between hypothermia and warmth, between predator bait and invisible shelter, between waking up refreshed or not waking up at all. I'm about to reveal the forgotten technologies that kept our species alive when Earth was trying its absolute hardest to kill us. We're talking about innovations so effective that modern outdoor gear companies are still trying to reverse engineer them. Sleep systems so sophisticated that Navy SEALs would weep with envy, and survival strategies so ruthlessly efficient that they helped a hairless, weak ape species conquer a planet ruled by giants. The evidence comes from 3 revolutionary archaeological sites that have rewritten everything we thought we knew about Ice Age survival. At Sibidu Cave in South Africa, researchers discovered 77,000-year-old bedding that would make a 5-star hotel jealous. At Border Cave, they found a pest control system that modern exterminators can't match. And at Ohalo the Tomb, they uncovered sleeping technology so advanced it took humanity 70,000 years to improve upon it. But this isn't just ancient history. As climate change threatens to destabilize our modern world, as supply chains collapse and technology fails, the survival wisdom encoded in these prehistoric sleeping systems might be the difference between thriving and dying in an uncertain future. Your ancestors faced down ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, and predators that could snap your spine like kindling, and they did it all while getting a better night's sleep than most modern humans. So settle in, because we're about to journey back to a time when your bedroom was a battlefield, your mattress was a miracle of engineering, and your pillow could literally save your life. Welcome to the ultimate guide to Ice Age bedding, where comfort met catastrophe, and somehow comfort won. The first bombshell drops at Sibidu Cave, South Africa, where Dr. Lynn Wadley made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the archaeological world. Layer after layer of sediment, each representing thousands of years, revealed the same pattern: grass mattresses so sophisticated they'd shame modern manufacturing. But here's the kicker: these weren't random piles of vegetation. They were engineered sleep systems dating back 77,000 years. The construction was methodical, almost obsessive in its precision. The base layer consisted of sedge grass stems arranged like a prehistoric box spring to provide structural support and drainage. But it's the top layer that reveals the true genius: leaves from Cryptocarya woodii, a tree whose crushed foliage releases natural insect repellent compounds. Your ancestors weren't just building beds, They were manufacturing bug free zones in a world where a single infected bite could mean death. The dimensions tell their own story of Ice Age luxury. These mattresses measured up to 22 square feet, large enough for an entire family, and stood 12 inches thick. That's not a sleeping pad, that's a prehistoric California king. The compressed layers show evidence of repeated use, careful maintenance, and systematic replacement. This wasn't camping, this was permanent residential engineering. But here's where it gets really wild. When the bedding became too infested or worn, they didn't abandon it like modern hunter gatherers. They burned it. Deliberately. The charcoal layers at Sibudu reveal a maintenance schedule that would impress any modern facility manager. Burn the old bedding, spread ash to deter insects, lay down fresh materials. Rinse and repeat for 40,000 years. Think about the implications. This level of bedding technology required not just knowledge, but culture. Someone had to discover that Cryptocarya woodii repelled insects. Someone had to figure out the optimal grass to leaf ratio. Someone had to develop the burning protocols. And all of this knowledge had to be passed down through generations, refined and perfected across millennia. The chemical analysis reveals just how sophisticated this pest control really was. The crushed Cryptocarya leaves don't just smell bad to insects, they contain compounds that disrupt insect nervous systems. It's essentially a natural pesticide factory built into every mattress. Your ancestors were practicing biochemical warfare against bugs 70,000 years before we invented DDT. But Sibidu wasn't unique. Similar bedding systems appear across Africa during the same period, suggesting this technology spread through trade networks and cultural exchange. By 77,000 years ago, humans had developed standardized sleep systems that were being shared across vast distances. The first global bedroom standards, if you will. The preservation at Sibudu also reveals something heartbreaking, evidence of family sleeping arrangements. The wear patterns show adult-sized impressions flanked by smaller depressions, children sleeping between parents for warmth and protection. In a world where cave bears denned 50 feet away and leopards hunted at night, family bed wasn't just about bonding. It was about survival. And here's the detail that'll give you chills. They oriented their beds to face the cave entrance, always. Every single layer across 40,000 years of occupation shows the same pattern. Even in sleep, they were ready to fight or flee. The bedding wasn't just about comfort, it was a tactical position designed for rapid deployment in case of night attacks. The Sibidu bedding represents humanity's first victory over the hostile African night. For the first time in evolutionary history, our ancestors could sleep deeply, comfortably, and safely. This wasn't just better rest, this was the foundation of everything that followed. Because only a well rested species could develop the complex culture, technology, and social structures that would eventually conquer the planet. 600 miles north, at Border Cave, archaeologists uncovered something that made the Sibidu discovery look primitive. Here, 200,000 years ago, our ancestors weren't just making beds, they were running what can only be described as the world's first integrated pest management system. The setup was ingenious in its simplicity. Grass sheaves from the Panicoidea subfamily formed the base, broad-leaved grasses chosen specifically for their cushioning properties and natural resistance to decay. But it's what came next that reveals the true sophistication. Layers of wood ash, strategically spread between the grass layers like a prehistoric pesticide sandwich. The ash wasn't random. Chemical analysis shows it came from specific trees, primarily Tarchinanthus or camphor bush, which burns to create ash with natural insecticidal properties. The microscopic structure of this ash is brutal to insects. It clogs their breathing apparatus, desiccates their exoskeletons, and creates an alkaline environment that destroys their eggs. It's chemical warfare disguised as housekeeping. But here's where Border Cave gets really impressive: the maintenance schedule. The occupants didn't just build these beds once and hope for the best. They operated on a systematic rotation, burning old bedding, analyzing ash coverage, and timing new construction to optimize pest control. Archaeological evidence shows this system operated continuously for 160,000 years. That's longer than our species has existed outside Africa. The precision is staggering. The ash layers are exactly thick enough to deter insects without creating respiratory problems for humans. Too thin, and bugs break through. Too thick, and people can't breathe. Someone figured out the optimal ratio through trial and error, then encoded that knowledge into cultural practices that survived for millennia. The bedding arrangement reveals sophisticated understanding of cave dynamics. The sleeping areas cluster near the back wall, where body heat accumulates and predators can't approach from behind. But they're positioned to avoid the deepest recesses, where carbon dioxide pools and humidity breeds disease. It's environmental engineering that would challenge modern architects. Evidence of specialized tools appears throughout the border cave sequence: grass cutting implements, ash spreaders, even what appear to be prehistoric bedding rakes for maintaining surface texture. These people weren't just using what they found, they were manufacturing purpose built equipment for sleep system maintenance. The most remarkable discovery came from the microscopic analysis of the bedding layers: human skin cells, hair, and even traces of ochre pigment, suggesting these beds weren't just functional, they were personal. Individual families maintained their own sleeping areas with distinctive arrangements, almost like prehistoric interior decorating. But the real genius was the integrated approach. The same ash that deterred insects also provided fire safety. It wouldn't ignite if sparks from the hearth landed on the bedding. The grass selection wasn't just about comfort. Different species had different burning characteristics, allowing for controlled maintenance fires that cleaned the bedding without destroying the cave. The social implications are staggering. This level of bedding sophistication required cooperation, planning, and resource management. Someone had to gather specific grasses during optimal seasons. Someone had to maintain the fires that produced the right ash. Someone had to coordinate the burning schedules to ensure continuous sleeping availability for the entire group. Border Cave reveals that 200,000 years ago, our ancestors weren't just surviving, they were optimizing. They'd turned sleep from a vulnerable necessity into a comfortable, safe, and hygienic experience. The foundation was set for everything that would follow: the complex societies, the technological innovations, the cultural achievements that would eventually transform a small band of African apes into the dominant species on Earth. And it all started with figuring out how to sleep without being eaten, bitten, or frozen to death. The border cave bedding system wasn't just engineering, It was the beginning of human civilization, one comfortable night at a time. But if Sibadu and Border Cave were impressive, Ohalo the Seku was revolutionary. 23,000 years ago, on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, our ancestors achieved something that wouldn't be seen again until the invention of modern mattress manufacturing, mass produced, standardized sleeping surfaces with integrated attachment systems. The preservation at Ohalo the Two is miraculous. Waterlogged sediments that captured every detail of daily life like prehistoric amber. And what they reveal is a bedding technology so advanced it seems almost alien for its time period. We're talking about engineered sleep surfaces that used materials science, mechanical engineering, and even early chemistry. The construction method was revolutionary. Instead of loose grass layers like earlier sites, the Ohalode II inhabitants created thick grass bunches and arranged them in overlapping patterns, like prehistoric shingles designed to shed moisture and distribute weight evenly. But here's the breakthrough. They used a clay based adhesive to bind the grass bunches together, creating the world's first composite mattress material. The clay adhesive wasn't just mud. Chemical analysis reveals a sophisticated mixture. Local clay combined with organic binders, probably plant saps, heated to specific temperatures to achieve optimal adhesion without becoming brittle. They'd essentially invented a prehistoric polymer, a flexible, waterproof bonding agent that held the entire sleep system together. The engineering precision is mind blowing. The grass bunches were sized uniformly, suggesting standardized manufacturing processes. The clay application shows consistent thickness and coverage patterns. Most impressively, the entire system was modular. Damaged sections could be replaced without rebuilding the entire bed. It's preventive maintenance thinking that wouldn't reappear until the Industrial Revolution. But Ohalo the Seku's real innovation was spatial optimization. Unlike the family style bedding at earlier sites, these sleeping areas were individually sized and positioned. Analysis shows beds designed for single adults, couples, and family groups, each optimized for different thermal and space requirements. They'd invented custom bedding 20,000 years before anyone else. The positioning reveals sophisticated understanding of indoor climate control. The beds weren't randomly placed, but positioned to take advantage of heat circulation patterns within the structures. Thermal mapping of the preserved floor surfaces shows that sleeping areas were located in zones that would maintain optimal temperatures throughout the night. These people understood convection currents. Tool marks on the preserved bedding show evidence of maintenance activities, regular fluffing to maintain loft, systematic replacement of worn sections, and even what appears to be seasonal reconfiguration, lighter arrangements for warm weather, denser configurations for cold periods. This wasn't static technology, it was adaptive engineering. The most stunning discovery was evidence of quality control. Some grass bunches show signs of being rejected and discarded. Microscopic analysis reveals inferior grass species, improper preparation, or inadequate sizing. Someone was inspecting these materials and maintaining manufacturing standards. Quality assurance 23,000 years ago. The social implications are staggering. This level of bedding sophistication required specialized knowledge, dedicated labor, and resource allocation that goes far beyond basic survival. The Ohalodui II inhabitants weren't just making places to sleep, they were investing in comfort, health, and quality of life. This suggests a society with surplus resources and the leisure time to pursue optimization rather than mere survival. The preservation also reveals personal touches. Wear patterns that suggest individual sleep in preferences, small modifications that indicate user customization, even evidence of repairs made with different materials, probably when preferred resources weren't available. These beds weren't just functional, they were personal spaces that people cared about and maintained. Perhaps most remarkably, the Ohalo the Tune bedding shows evidence of continuous improvement. The lower layers use simpler techniques and materials, while upper layers show increasingly sophisticated methods. Someone was experimenting, innovating, and passing knowledge down through generations. This was active technological development, not static tradition. The Ohalolutun site represents the moment when human bedding technology achieved something unprecedented. It became better than what nature provided. For millions of years, our ancestors had made do with whatever natural materials they could find. But at Ohalo the Sekub, they began manufacturing superior alternatives. They'd crossed the threshold from using nature to improving upon it. This wasn't just about sleeping anymore. The Ohalo Chaku bedding represents the birth of human engineering thinking, the idea that natural limitations could be overcome through knowledge, planning, and systematic improvement. Every technology that followed, from agriculture to spaceflight, flows from this fundamental insight. Humans don't have to accept the world as they find it. 23,000 years ago, beside an ancient lake, our ancestors achieved something profound. They didn't just survive the night, they conquered it. And in doing so, they laid the foundation for every comfort, every innovation, every achievement in human history, all because someone figured out how to sleep better than nature intended. But grass and clay were just the beginning. The real game changer came when our ancestors discovered they could turn their predators into their protectors by sleeping on their skins. The archaeological evidence reveals a transformation so profound it literally changed human physiology. The moment we began wearing the night instead of hiding from it. The story begins in Morocco, 300,000 years ago, where cut marks on animal bones tell a tale of desperate innovation. These aren't butchery marks, they're skinning marks made with tools specifically designed to remove pelts intact. Someone had figured out that the same animals trying to kill them could, in death, keep them alive through the night. The progression is written in stone tools across Africa and Europe. Early skinning implements are crude, effective only on small animals. But by 200,000 years ago, we see specialized hide-working tools that could process everything from rabbit fur to mammoth hide. These weren't weapons repurposed for skinning, they were purpose-built leather manufacturing equipment. The sophistication escalates rapidly. At sites across Europe, archaeologists find evidence of hide preparation that would impress modern tanners. Scraping tools designed to remove fat without damaging the skin. Smoking apparatus that preserved pelts for months. Even early chemical processing, using plant tannins and animal brains to create supple, waterproof leather. But it's the selection criteria that reveal true expertise. Analysis of preserved furs shows our ancestors weren't just using whatever they could kill. They were targeting specific animals for specific properties. Reindeer for winter coats, hollow hairs provide incredible insulation, wolf fur for moisture resistance, rabbit pelts for infant bedding. This was strategic resource harvesting based on deep understanding of material properties. The numbers are staggering. A complete winter sleep system required at least 5 large animals, 2 reindeer for the base layer, 1 bear for the top covering, and multiple smaller animals for gaps and repairs. That's 2,000 pounds of predator that had to be killed, processed, and converted into bedding before winter arrived. The logistical coordination required would challenge modern manufacturing. The processing technology evolved at breakneck speed. By 100,000 years ago, hide preparation had become a specialized craft. Archaeological sites show dedicated leatherworking areas with sophisticated toolkits, scrapers for fat removal, smoothers for texture, piercing tools for joining pieces. These workshops produced bedding materials that lasted for years, not months. The thermal engineering was extraordinary. Fur bedding systems show evidence of layering principles that modern outdoor gear manufacturers still use. Moisture wicking inner layers, insulating middle sections, and wind resistant outer shells. A complete Ice Age sleep system could maintain body temperature in conditions that would kill an unprotected human in hours. But here's what separates human hide work from animal behavior. We didn't just use pelts, we improved them. Evidence from multiple sites shows our ancestors were modifying natural fur properties through processing techniques. Controlled stretching to increase surface area, chemical treatments to enhance water resistance, even primitive dyeing using ochre and plant materials. The social implications are profound. This level of hide processing required specialized knowledge that took years to master. Someone had to learn which animals to target at which times of year. Winter pelts are thicker. Someone had to develop the chemical processes that preserved skins without making them toxic. Someone had to figure out the construction techniques that turned random pieces into integrated sleep systems. The evidence shows these skills were primarily held by women. Tool wear patterns on female skeletons, spatial analysis of leather-working areas near hearths, even burial goods that include specialized hide processing equipment with female remains. This suggests that while men might have provided the raw materials through hunting, women were the engineers who transformed death into comfort. The quality standards were uncompromising. Rejected hide pieces appeared at every major site, furs that didn't meet requirements for softness, thickness, or durability. In a world where every resource was precious, the fact that people were discarding inadequate materials speaks to how critical proper bedding was for survival. The innovation continued relentlessly. By 50,000 years ago, we see evidence of composite fur systems, different animal skins sewn together to combine the best properties of each. Rabbit fur for softness against the skin, deer hide for structural integrity, wolf pelts for weather resistance. These weren't just blankets, they were engineered textile systems. The preservation at some sites is so good we can still see the stitching. Microscopic analysis reveals thread made from sinew, plant fibers, even human hair in emergencies. The sewing techniques show sophisticated understanding of stress distribution, load bearing, and thermal bridging. These people were textile engineers 40,000 years before weaving was invented. Perhaps most remarkably, the fur bedding shows evidence of inheritance. Wear patterns suggest some sleep systems were used by multiple generations, carefully maintained and passed down as family treasures. In a world Where most possessions were utilitarian and disposable, bedding had become valuable enough to inherit. The transformation was complete. Our ancestors had gone from being prey that slept in terror to predators that slept in luxury, wrapped in the skins of everything that had once hunted them. They'd turned the food chain upside down and made their former predators into their servants. And every night, as they settled into beds made from bear fur and wolf pelts, they were reminded of their victory over the hostile world that had tried so hard to kill them. This wasn't just survival, it was dominance. And it all started with figuring out how to sleep warm in a cold world. But even the most sophisticated fur bedding was useless without the one technology that separated humans from every other species on Earth: fire. The archaeological evidence reveals that our ancestors didn't just discover how to make fire, they invented the world's first central heating systems, turning caves into climate controlled luxury suites that would make modern hotels envious. The revolution begins at Chisholm Cave in Israel 400,000 years ago, where archaeologists uncovered evidence of controlled indoor fires that burned continuously for centuries. These weren't random campfires, they were engineered heating systems with dedicated fuel supplies, sophisticated ventilation, and even backup ignition sources. Someone had figured out how to domesticate fire itself. The thermal engineering was extraordinary. Cave hearths weren't randomly placed, but positioned to maximize heat circulation while minimizing smoke exposure. Computational fluid dynamics models of preserved cave sites show that our ancestors understood convection patterns, heat reflection, and airflow in ways that modern HVAC engineers would recognize and respect. The fuel management reveals systematic planning that extended across seasons. Analysis of charcoal remains shows stockpiling of specific wood types: hardwoods for long burning base fires, softwoods for quick ignition, even dried fungi and animal fat for emergency fuel when wood was scarce. These people were energy portfolio managers 400,000 years before economics was invented. But it's the integration with bedding systems that shows true genius. The positioning of sleep areas relative to hearths follows mathematical principles of heat distribution that weren't formally described until the 18th century. Beds placed too close would overheat and create fire hazards. Too far away and people would freeze. The optimal distance required understanding thermal radiation, air circulation, and human physiology. The evidence from European caves reveals even more sophisticated systems. At sites like Grotte du Lazaret in France, archaeologists found evidence of zoned heating, different areas maintained at different temperatures for different activities. Sleeping areas kept warm but not hot, work areas with higher temperatures for tool making, storage areas kept cool to preserve food. These people had invented climate control. The maintenance systems were incredibly sophisticated. Firekeeping wasn't a casual responsibility, but a specialized role requiring deep technical knowledge. Archaeological evidence shows dedicated fire tending tools: bellows made from animal bladders, fuel storage systems, even early chimney designs that channeled smoke away from living areas while retaining heat. The backup systems reveal planning that would impress modern emergency managers. Multiple ignition sources were maintained simultaneously: banked coals that could smolder for days, fire bow sets ready for immediate use, even fire carrying technology that allowed flames to be transported between locations. These people understood that fire failure meant death, and they planned accordingly. The social coordination required was staggering. Fire maintenance needed 24-hour attention during winter months. Someone had to gather fuel, someone had to tend flames, someone had to manage smoke and ash removal. This level of coordination required social structures, role specialization, and communication systems that went far beyond simple survival groups. The innovation never stopped. By 100,000 years ago, we see evidence of advanced fire technology that wouldn't be reinvented until medieval times. Controlled draft systems that regulated flame intensity, heat banking techniques that stored thermal energy in stones, even primitive fire resistant materials that protected bedding from sparks and embers. The psychological impact was as important as the physical benefits. Fire transformed night from a time of terror into a time of safety and productivity. Archaeological evidence shows that most toolmaking, food preparation, and social activities occurred around evening fires. These weren't just heating systems, they were the foundation of human culture. The energy calculations are mind blowing. A properly managed cave fire could maintain livable temperatures for 30 to 40 people through the harshest winter conditions while consuming less fuel than a modern wood stove. The efficiency was achieved through careful cave selection, optimal fire placement, and heat circulation techniques that maximized every BTU. The integration with other technologies created synergistic effects. Fire heated stones could be moved to bedding areas for localized warming. Smoke from specific plants repelled insects while providing heat. Hot coals could be buried under sleeping areas for all night warmth. The entire cave became an integrated life support system. Perhaps most remarkably, the fire management shows evidence of individual innovation and improvement. Different caves show different heating techniques, suggesting ongoing experimentation and technological development. Knowledge was shared between groups, creating innovation networks that spanned continents and thousands of years. The mastery was so complete that some groups began using fire offensively, creating heat barriers that kept predators away, using smoke signals for long distance communication, even employing controlled burns to modify landscapes for better hunting. Fire had gone from a tool for survival to a weapon for environmental control. By the time our ancestors began their global expansion, they weren't just carrying fire, they were carrying the knowledge to turn any cave, any shelter, any sleeping area into a warm, safe, comfortable home. They'd solved the fundamental problem that had killed most large mammals during ice ages: how to stay warm enough to survive the night. The cave fires that warmed our ancestors' bedding were more than just heating systems. They were the forges where human civilization was born. Every warm night, every comfortable sleep, every morning our ancestors woke up refreshed instead of dead was another step toward the complex societies that would eventually conquer the planet. All because someone figured out how to sleep warm in a cold world. But the ultimate expression of Ice Age sleeping technology wasn't found in Africa or the Middle East. It was discovered in the frozen tundra of Eastern Europe, where archaeologists uncovered architectural achievements so sophisticated they rewrote the history of human engineering. Mammoth bone houses with integrated sleeping systems that turned the remains of giants into palaces for survivors. The first discovery at Mezhyrich, Ukraine, left archaeologists speechless. Emerging from the permafrost was a structure built entirely from mammoth bones, skulls for foundations, tusks for framework, shoulder blades for walls. But this wasn't crude shelter construction. This was precision engineering that would challenge modern architects working with conventional materials. The numbers are staggering. 149 mammoths contributed to just four structures. That's 3,000 individual bones, each weighing between 50 and 200 pounds, precisely selected and positioned according to engineering principles that distributed weight, maximized thermal efficiency, and created living spaces that could house entire communities through Arctic winters. The construction techniques reveal sophisticated understanding of structural engineering. Mammoth skulls, each weighing over 200 pounds, were interlocked to create foundations that could support massive loads without shifting. Tusks were heated and bent into curves that form. The construction techniques reveal sophisticated understanding of structural engineering. Mammoth skulls, each weighing over 200 pounds, were interlocked to create foundations that could support massive loads without shifting. Tusks were heated and bent into curves that formed architectural arches, an engineering principle that wouldn't be formally described until Roman times, yet these Ice Age architects were using it 15,000 years earlier. But it's the interior design that reveals the true genius. The sleeping areas weren't afterthoughts, they were the central design principle around which everything else was built. Archaeological evidence shows dedicated sleeping zones with different thermal properties, family areas near the center for maximum warmth, individual spaces around the periphery, even specialized areas for the elderly and infants. The thermal engineering was extraordinary. Mammoth bones have natural insulating properties. The marrow cavities trap air, creating dead space that prevents heat transfer. But our ancestors improved on nature's design by selecting specific bones for specific functions, skulls for foundations because they're the most insulating, long bones for walls because they're the strongest, ribs for roofing because they're the most flexible. The bedding integration was seamless. Inside these bone houses, archaeologists found evidence of sophisticated sleeping systems that combined all the technologies we've discussed: grass mattresses for base comfort, fur coverings for warmth, and fire heated stones for localized heating. But the mammoth bone architecture created something unprecedented: sleeping areas that maintained comfortable temperatures even when outside conditions dropped to 40 degrees. The scale of these operations defies imagination. Each house required killing at least 40 adult mammoths, animals that stood 11 feet tall and could crush a human with a casual step. The logistics alone would challenge modern construction crews. How do you transport 60,000 pounds of mammoth bones across frozen tundra using only human labor? How do you coordinate the work of dozens of people for months at a time? How do you feed construction crews while they're building instead of hunting? The answer reveals social organization that was far more complex than anyone imagined. These weren't desperate survivors throwing together emergency shelters. These were planned communities with specialized roles, coordinated labor, and long term resource management. The mammoth bone houses represent the birth of human architecture, the moment we stopped adapting to our environment and started engineering it to suit our needs. The preservation at some sites is so complete we can see evidence of interior decoration: mammoth bone furniture sleeping platforms carved from shoulder blades, storage areas built into skull cavities, even artistic elements where bones were arranged in decorative patterns. These people weren't just surviving, they were creating homes, complete with the aesthetic touches that make a house into a dwelling place. The heating systems were integrated into the architecture itself. Central hearths positioned to maximize heat distribution, smoke holes cut through bone roofing, even thermal mass systems where certain bones were heated during the day to radiate warmth throughout the night. The entire structure functioned as a giant thermal regulation machine, but perhaps most remarkably, these houses show evidence of multi generational occupation. Some sites contain evidence of renovation, expansion, even what appears to be inheritance, newer construction built on foundations laid by previous generations. These weren't temporary shelters, but permanent homes passed down through families across centuries. The site at Kostanki reveals the ultimate achievement, an entire village of mammoth bone houses, each with specialized functions, sleeping houses for families, workshop houses for tool making, storage houses for food preservation. This wasn't just architecture, it was urban planning 20,000 years before cities were supposed to exist. The psychological impact must have been profound. Imagine sleeping inside the bones of the giants that once terrorized your ancestors. Every night, surrounded by mammoth skulls and ribs, our ancestors were reminded of their victory over forces that had seemed invincible. They'd gone from hiding from mammoths to living inside them, the ultimate expression of human dominance over nature. The acoustic properties were carefully considered. Mammoth bone chambers have natural resonance that amplifies sound, but the interior arrangements show evidence of acoustic engineering, sleeping areas positioned to minimize noise transmission, common areas designed to enhance communication. These people understood that comfortable living required not just physical comfort, but acoustic comfort. The environmental control extended beyond heating. Ventilation systems built into bone arrangements provided fresh air without creating drafts. Drainage systems prevented moisture buildup that could cause hypothermia. Even humidity control, certain bone arrangements that prevented the air from becoming too dry or too moist for comfortable breathing. The maintenance systems reveal long-term thinking that spanned seasons and years. Bone replacement schedules for elements that weathered over time. Structural reinforcement added as buildings aged. Even preventive maintenance, evidence of regular inspection, and now that the ice had melted and the giants were gone, humanity faced a new challenge, remembering what they had destroyed. The old stories weren't enough anymore. Cave paintings could capture the mammoth's tusks, the bear's claws, but they couldn't preserve the thunder of 10,000 hooves across the tundra. They couldn't hold the sound of the last mammoth's trumpet echoing across empty valleys. So our ancestors did something revolutionary. They turned their trauma into technology. The invention of complex language wasn't just about communication, it was about preservation. Every grammatical structure, every verb tense, every way we have of describing time and causation emerged from the desperate need to pass down the memory of what we'd lost. Future tense exists because someone needed to warn their children about consequences they'd never see. Past perfect emerged because someone had to explain how the world used to be full of giants. Doctor, the deepest roots of human language are planted in extinction guilt, but language alone wasn't enough. The survivors needed institutions, systems that could carry forward not just the memory of giants, but the lesson of what happens when intelligence meets ecosystem. The first religions weren't worship of invisible gods, they were elaborate apology systems for visible absences. Archaeological evidence from Göbekli Tepe in Turkey shows something unprecedented: the world's first monumental architecture built by hunter gatherers 11,500 years ago. But look closer at the carvings. Every pillar depicts the same theme: humans surrounded by animals they'd driven extinct. This wasn't celebration, it was memorial architecture. The first temple was a gilt cathedral. The agricultural revolution that followed wasn't just about growing food, it was about growing forgiveness. If you could make the land produce, if you could create abundance from scarcity, maybe you could atone for what you'd taken. Every furrow was penance, every harvest a prayer for redemption. Cities emerged from the same psychological need. When you've emptied the world of everything magnificent, you have to build magnificence yourself. The first ziggurats weren't reaching toward gods. They were trying to replace the giants whose absence made the horizon feel too flat, too empty, too human. Even our concept of time changed. Before the extinctions, human societies lived in cyclical time. Seasons returned, herds migrated, everything came back. After the giants fell, we invented linear time. History with a beginning, middle, and end. Progress towards something better because the past was unbearable to revisit. The psychological transformation was complete. We became the first species that knew it was alone. Every human innovation since, art, music, literature, science, space exploration, has been an attempt to fill the giant shaped hole in our psyche. We've been trying to become worthy of the empty world we inherited. But here's the twist that paleopsychologists are just beginning to understand: the guilt was adaptive. Societies that developed elaborate systems for remembering and mourning their ecological crimes became the most innovative, the most successful, the most driven to transcend their origins. The shame of killing giants made us giants ourselves. Modern humans still carry this in our neural architecture. Why do children love dinosaurs? Because we're hardwired to mourn giant reptiles we never met. Why do we cry at movies about extinct species? Because grief for lost megafauna is encoded in our emotional operating system. Why do we build skyscrapers, write symphonies, launch rockets toward the stars? Because we're still trying to prove we deserve the planet we emptied. Every conservation effort, every national park, every endangered species act is a love letter to the mammoths we'll never see again. We've spent the last 10,000 years trying to become the kind of species that giants could trust. The tragedy is, we had to kill them all to learn how. The final irony: our greatest achievements as a species flow directly from our greatest crime. The guilt that built civilization, the shame that sparked innovation, the desperate need to become worthy of forgiveness from creatures that can no longer grant it. We are the children of extinction, raised by regret, educated by absence. Every human alive today is the descendant of survivors who carried forward not just genes but grief, not just tools but trauma, not just stories, but the terrible knowledge that intelligence without wisdom leads to emptiness. The giants are gone, but their ghosts built everything we call human. We live in monuments to their memory, speak languages shaped by their absence, and dream of futures where we might finally deserve the trust we betrayed. 30,000 years later, we're still writing that apology letter, still trying to fill a mammoth shaped hole in our souls, still searching for redemption in a world we made too small for anything but us. The Ice Age ended, but the Guilt Age has just begun. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps the weight of what we've done is what keeps us reaching toward what we might become. In the end, we didn't just survive the Ice Age, we survived becoming the only species that knows what it means to be alone with the consequences of its intelligence. And from that terrible knowledge, we built everything beautiful about being human. The mammoths would probably forgive us by now. Looking at these reference transcripts, I can see the specific tone, flow, vocabulary, and vernacular I should emulate. Here's part 3 of the script. But here's where the archaeological record gets absolutely mind blowing. While Hollywood keeps pushing this image of primitive cave people huddled around pathetic fires, shivering in animal skins, the reality uncovered at sites like Sibidu Cave in South Africa rewrites everything we thought we knew about Ice Age survival. We're not talking about desperate scrounging for warmth. We're talking about prehistoric engineering that would make modern camping enthusiasts look like rank amateurs. Picture this: 77,000 years ago, someone designed the world's first luxury mattress system. Not a pile of random leaves thrown on cold stone, a deliberately engineered sleep surface consisting of at least 15 layers of carefully selected materials. Sedge grass formed the foundation, chosen specifically for its structural properties. On top, leaves from Cryptocarya woodii, selected not randomly but because when crushed, these leaves emit chemical compounds that repel insects. This wasn't luck. This was sophisticated materials science applied to bedroom design. The numbers are staggering. These prehistoric mattresses measured up to 22 square feet, large enough for an entire family. At an estimated 12 inches thick, they provided comfort that would rival expensive modern bedding. But here's the kicker: this wasn't a one-time innovation. Archaeological evidence shows mat making continued at this site for 40,000 years. 40,000 years. That's longer than all of recorded human history. Think about what that means. Generation after generation refined these techniques, passing down knowledge of which grasses provided the best support, which leaves offered superior insect protection, how to layer materials for optimal comfort and durability. This was a sleeping technology so successful it outlasted entire ice ages. But Sibidu Cave was just the beginning. At Border Cave, also in South Africa, researchers discovered evidence of an even more sophisticated sleep system dating back 200,000 years. Here's where it gets really wild. These ancient humans weren't just building comfortable beds, they were creating integrated pest management systems that would impress modern exterminators. The genius was in the ash. They'd deliberately burn old bedding, then spread the ash across sleeping areas before laying down fresh grass bundles. Why? Because ash blocks insects' breathing apparatus and eventually dehydrates them. It's a completely natural, non-toxic pesticide that required zero chemistry knowledge but produced pharmaceutical-grade results. They'd literally figured out how to sleep bug-free in caves teeming with parasites, and they weren't stopping there. On top of the ash layers, they'd place bundles of Tarchinanthus, camphor bush, whose aromatic properties created an additional barrier against crawling insects. This plant is still used for insect control in rural East Africa today. Our ancestors had discovered what took modern science centuries to understand. The evidence now gets even more incredible at Ohalo de Tun, a 23,000-year-old site that preserves humanity's most sophisticated prehistoric bedroom. Here, they weren't just throwing materials down randomly. They selected specific grass species characterized by dense bunches of soft, delicate stems. They chose grasses growing in nearby saline soil, understanding that salt adapted plants had different properties. But the real breakthrough was their adhesive technology. They attached grass bunches together using a compact clay substance, creating what archaeologists describe as a tile like arrangement. Think about that. They'd invented prehistoric carpet tiles, complete with adhesive backing, 23,000 years before we figured out the same thing. The sophistication doesn't end with materials. These ancient sleep engineers understood interior design principles that modern architects study today. At Ohalo the Tomb, bedding was strategically placed only near walls, not in the center of living spaces. This created distinct zones, designated sleeping areas, separate from work and cooking spaces. They'd invented the bedroom as a concept. Meanwhile, across the Ice Age world, other groups were developing parallel innovations. In the Channel Islands off California, 13,000 years ago, humans were creating shellfish hooks so advanced they required deep water boats to use effectively. These weren't desperate shore gatherers. These were maritime specialists with ocean going technology. The forensic evidence from these sleeping systems reveals something that completely destroys our caveman stereotypes. Microscopic analysis shows debris from stone tool manufacture mixed with grass remains in bedding areas. These people were literally working from bed, combining comfort with productivity in ways that would make modern remote workers jealous. At some sites, tiny rounded grains of red and orange ochre were found embedded in bedding materials, suggesting they were either rubbing off human skin or colored objects. These weren't just functional sleeping spaces. They were decorated, personalized environments where people expressed individual identity through color and design. But perhaps the most revolutionary discovery comes from the maintenance schedules. These weren't disposable sleeping arrangements. Archaeological evidence shows regular refreshing cycles, burning old bedding, spreading fresh ash, laying new materials. They'd developed sustainable bedroom maintenance programs that ensured continuous comfort across seasons and years. The implications stagger modern researchers. These Ice Age humans weren't just surviving, they were optimizing. They understood that quality sleep was essential for cognitive function, immune system health, and overall survival. While we struggle with sleep hygiene, using pharmaceutical aids and expensive mattress technology, they'd solved the same problems using only natural materials and accumulated wisdom. Recent discoveries push the timeline even further back. At sites throughout Africa, Europe, and Asia, evidence of sophisticated sleeping arrangements appears wherever humans established long term settlements. This wasn't regional knowledge, it was global human innovation, suggesting that comfortable sleep was considered so essential that every population independently developed advanced solutions. The bedding systems also reveal sophisticated understanding of seasonal adaptation. Different grass species were selected for different times of year. Winter bedding used materials with superior insulation properties. Summer arrangements prioritized airflow and cooling. They'd essentially invented the seasonal bedroom makeover 50,000 years before interior design magazines. What emerges from this archaeological evidence isn't primitive survival, but prehistoric luxury. These Ice Age humans had solved the fundamental challenge of comfortable sleep using only materials available in nature. They'd created bedding systems so effective that the basic principles, natural materials, layered construction, integrated pest control, remain unchanged in traditional cultures today. The next time you adjust your thermostat, spray for bugs, or flip your memory foam mattress, remember this. Every innovation you consider the modern was first developed by humans who had nothing but their intelligence, observation skills, and determination to sleep comfortably. They didn't just survive the Ice Age, they slept through it in luxury that would make five-star hotels envious. And this was just their bedrooms. Looking at the reference videos, I can see their engaging conversational tone with strong hooks, personal stories, and practical insights. Here's part 4 of the Cavemen Sleeping series. Part 4: The Ice Age Bedroom Revolution. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. While we've been talking about basic survival bedding, our ancestors were about to pull off something that would make modern interior designers weep with envy. They were about to invent the world's first climate-controlled bedroom, and they did it 40,000 years ago with nothing but mammoth bones and sheer human ingenuity. Picture this. You're standing in what will one day become Ukraine, but right now it's a frozen wasteland where the wind hits -40 and your breath turns to ice crystals before it leaves your mouth. Any normal human would be dead in minutes. But these aren't normal humans. These are the Gravettian people, and they're about to revolutionize what it means to sleep in comfort. Dr. Olga Soffer has spent decades studying these sites, and what she found blew her mind. We weren't looking at primitive shelters, she explains, brushing decades of sediment from mammoth bones. We were looking at architecture. The numbers are staggering. At sites like Mezherich and Mezin, these Ice Age engineers constructed houses using the bones of over 150 mammoths. That's not a typo. 150 mammoths worth of bones, carefully selected, transported, and assembled into structures that would keep entire families warm through winters that lasted 8 months. But here's the genius part that nobody talks about. These weren't just random bone piles. These were thermal engineering marvels that understood heat dynamics better than most modern homes. The foundation was mammoth skulls. Each skull weighing over 200 pounds, interlocked like prehistoric concrete blocks. The walls, massive shoulder blades and pelvic bones, stacked with mathematical precision. But the real innovation was the insulation system. They packed the gaps between bones with smaller bones, creating dead air spaces that trapped heat like prehistoric double glazing. The sleeping areas blew my mind. These Ice Age bedroom designers created raised sleeping platforms using mammoth leg bones as supports. Why raised? Because cold air sinks. By elevating their beds just 18 inches off the ground, they created warm sleeping zones while cold air pooled harmlessly below. But wait, it gets better. They engineered ventilation systems. Small gaps between specific bones created controlled airflow that prevented carbon monoxide poisoning from their fires while maintaining optimal temperature. They'd figured out HVAC systems 40,000 years before we called them HVAC systems. The thermal mass was incredible. Those massive mammoth bones absorbed heat during the day when fires burned brightest, then slowly released that warmth throughout the night. It's the same principle modern homes use, with concrete floors and brick walls, except these people did it with elephant bones. Recent excavations revealed something that made archaeologists question everything they thought they knew. At Kostienki, they found evidence of underfloor heating, channels carved beneath sleeping areas that directed warm air from central fires throughout the entire structure, prehistoric radiant heating that kept families comfortable in temperatures that would kill modern humans in hours. The bedding inside these bone houses was luxury beyond imagination. Multiple layers of carefully prepared furs, arranged in specific sequences. Bear fur closest to the ground for maximum insulation. Reindeer fur in the middle for its hollow hair heat trapping properties. Fox fur on top for its incredible softness and moisture wicking abilities. But the real game changer was their understanding of humidity control. Sleeping in a sealed space creates moisture problems that can kill you through hypothermia. These Ice Age engineers solved this by placing specific plants and mosses in strategic locations that naturally absorbed excess moisture while releasing pleasant aromatics that we now know have antimicrobial properties. Dr. Marie Prévost, studying these sites in France, discovered something that changed everything we thought about Ice Age intelligence. They weren't just building shelters, she says, examining microscopic wear patterns on bone tools. They were building homes. The evidence shows these bone houses weren't temporary shelters. They were multi-generational homes, continuously improved and expanded over decades. Some sites show evidence of three distinct building phases, each one more sophisticated than the last. Families were literally building better homes for their children and grandchildren. The sleeping arrangements inside reveal complex social structures. Children slept closest to the central fire, surrounded by adults. Elderly family members had special alcoves designed for easy access but maximum warmth. Even injured or disabled members had customized sleeping areas that accommodated their specific needs. And here's the detail that gives me chills. They decorated these bedrooms. Mammoth ivory carved into intricate patterns, ochre paintings on the interior bone walls, carefully arranged shells and stones that serve no practical purpose except beauty. These people, living in conditions that would challenge Navy SEALs, still found time to make their sleeping spaces beautiful. The heating technology was so effective that archaeologists find evidence of people wearing minimal clothing inside these structures, even during the worst Ice Age winters. While outside temperatures hit -60, inside temperatures stayed comfortable enough for normal human activities. But perhaps the most incredible discovery came from analysis of the bones themselves. These weren't random mammoth kills. The bones show careful selection, specific age groups, specific bone types, even specific weathering patterns. They were choosing bones like modern architects who choose materials, understanding that different bones had different thermal properties. Some mammoth bones are naturally hollow, creating perfect insulation chambers. Others are dense and heavy, ideal for thermal mass. The builders understood which bones to use where, creating integrated heating systems that modern engineers study for inspiration. The scale of these projects reveals something profound about Ice Age society. Moving and assembling 40 tons of mammoth bones required massive community cooperation. extended families working together, sharing knowledge, planning for the future. These weren't desperate survivors scraping by day to day. These were sophisticated people building for generations. Recent thermal imaging of reconstructed bone houses shows they could maintain interior temperatures 60 degrees warmer than outside air. That's the difference between deadly cold and comfortable living. It's the difference between survival and civilization. When you realize that these thermal engineering marvels were built by people using only stone tools and human labor, the achievement becomes almost impossible to comprehend. No cranes, no power tools, no modern materials, just human intelligence, cooperation, and an absolute refusal to accept that winter had to mean suffering. The mammoth bone bedroom wasn't just about staying warm. It was humanity's declaration that we could engineer our environment rather than simply endure it. It was the moment we stopped being at nature's mercy and started writing our own rules. These Ice Age architects didn't just survive the last glacial maximum, they thrived in it, creating living spaces so effective that their thermal principles are still used in modern Arctic construction. They turned the frozen wasteland into home, and in those carefully heated, perfectly insulated mammoth bone bedrooms, surrounded by family and warmed by engineering genius, our ancestors slept better than many people do today. They'd solved the fundamental challenge of human existence: how to be comfortable in an uncomfortable world. The mammoth bone bedroom revolution proved something profound. Give humans enough motivation, and we'll turn elephant bones into five-star accommodations. We'll make the impossible comfortable and the unbearable livable. Looking at your script so far, you've laid an incredible foundation with four comprehensive parts covering ancient bedding systems, mammoth bone architecture, thermal management, and survival innovations. The tone perfectly matches your reference material, authoritative yet accessible, with that signature blend of scientific detail and narrative storytelling. For part 5, I'll focus on the collaborative survival networks and social technologies that enabled Ice Age humans to thrive in the harshest conditions. Here's the continuation. But perhaps the most revolutionary survival technology wasn't made of stone or bone or hide. It was made of something far more powerful: human connections. In the frozen darkness of an Ice Age winter, your greatest weapon against death wasn't your spear or your fire, it was your neighbor. The footprints at Latoli tell a story that would make modern social media executives weep with envy. 6 million years ago, 3 early humans walked across volcanic ash, their prints preserved for eternity. But here's what stops researchers cold: they were walking together, side by side, in perfect coordination. Even our most ancient ancestors understood something we're still learning today: survival is a team sport. Fast forward to 30,000 years ago, and Ice Age humans had perfected social networking in ways that would shame Silicon Valley. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, archaeologists uncovered evidence of something extraordinary: a trade network spanning 500 kilometers, shells from the Mediterranean, amber from the Baltic, flint from specialized quarries hundreds of miles away. These weren't random encounters. This was organized commerce, complete with quality control, standardized products, and reliable supply chains. Dr. Gigi Svoboda, who spent decades excavating Dolní Věstonice, puts it bluntly. These people had LinkedIn profiles carved in ivory. They knew who to call for what, where to get the best materials, and how to maintain relationships across vast distances. But it gets even more impressive. At Sungir in Russia, genetic analysis of 34,000-year-old burials revealed something that rewrites our understanding of Ice Age society. The individuals weren't closely related, yet they were buried with identical elaborate grave goods, same bead patterns, same ivory ornaments, same red ochre treatments. They were displaying membership in what can only be called a prehistoric corporation. The mathematics of Ice Age social networking were brutal and beautiful. Small bands of 25-30 people couldn't survive alone. Genetic diversity required outbreeding. Resource fluctuations demanded backup plans. Knowledge preservation needed redundancy. So they built what anthropologists now recognize as the first global civilization, a network of interconnected groups spanning continents. Consider the mind-blowing logistics. At Kostenki in Russia, researchers found evidence of mammoth hunting camps that operated for centuries, not continuously occupied, but repeatedly used by different groups following the same seasonal patterns. They developed time-sharing arrangements for prime real estate, complete with maintenance protocols and usage rights. Ancient Airbnb, but with mammoths. The social technologies they developed would make modern HR departments jealous. Conflict resolution without violence, resource allocation based on need rather than power, leadership that rotated based on expertise rather than inheritance, decision making processes that included every adult voice. They'd solved problems we're still struggling with in boardrooms and parliaments. Dr. Sarah Hurdy from UC Davis studies the evolutionary basis of human cooperation. Ice Age humans didn't just cooperate better than other species, they cooperated better than we do today. They had to. When winter lasted 8 months and one bad decision meant death for everyone, you couldn't afford office politics or ego conflicts. Cooperation wasn't optional. The evidence appears in the most unexpected places. At Pavlov in the Czech Republic, archaeologists found something that initially baffled them: identical tool designs appearing simultaneously across sites hundreds of miles apart. Not traded tools, locally made tools using identical techniques. Someone was teaching standardized manufacturing processes across vast distances. They'd invented franchising. Even more remarkable, they'd solved the innovation paradox. How do you maintain traditional knowledge while encouraging new ideas? How do you preserve what works while adapting to change? The archaeological record shows they managed both. Core technologies remained stable for millennia, while experimental variations constantly appeared, were tested, and either adopted or abandoned. The social safety nets they created were more comprehensive than most modern welfare systems. At Kafse Cave in Israel, a child with severe developmental disabilities was cared for until death, then buried with the same honors as successful hunters. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a man who'd lost an arm, eye, and suffered severe head trauma lived for years afterward, clearly supported by his community. These weren't societies that discarded the weak. They were societies that understood that today's burden might be tomorrow's wisdom keeper. But perhaps their greatest social innovation was something we've largely forgotten: true leisure. Despite living in conditions that would challenge modern survivalists, Ice Age humans worked an estimated 15 to 20 hours per week. The rest was social time, community time, creative time, time for art, music, storytelling, and simply being human together. Modern hunter gatherer societies give us glimpses of this lost lifestyle. Kung people of the Kalahari work about 17 hours weekly for subsistence. The rest is social interaction, creativity, and what they call heart talk, deep conversations about life, relationships, and meaning. Ice Age humans that likely had similar patterns, just with better technology and more elaborate social networks. The collapse of these social networks, not climate change or human hunting, may explain why megafauna extinctions were so rapid and final. When mammoth populations fragmented, human knowledge networks fragmented too. Local expertise became isolated. Backup strategies were forgotten. The social technologies that had enabled sustainable hunting for millennia broke down just when they were needed most. We see this pattern repeating today. Traditional ecological knowledge disappears when communities are disrupted. Sustainable practices are abandoned when social networks fragment. The same connectivity that enabled Ice Age humans to thrive is what we're desperately trying to rebuild with our modern internet, our global supply chains, our international institutions. The bitter irony is that we've gained individual capability while losing collective resilience. An Ice Age human couldn't survive alone for a week, but their communities could survive anything. Modern humans can survive alone for months, but our communities collapse when the power goes out. Dr. Peter Gray from Boston College studies the social dimensions of human resilience. Ice Age humans were like neurons in a vast brain, individually limited, but collectively brilliant. They distributed their intelligence across their entire network. Kill one neuron, the brain keeps working. But damage the connections between neurons, and intelligence collapses. That's what happened to megafauna. The archaeological record shows that Ice Age social networks were anti-fragile. They got stronger under stress. Resource scarcity led to tighter cooperation. Climate challenges drove innovation, population pressure forced expansion, and cultural mixing. Every crisis became an opportunity for social evolution. They'd even solved the problem that destroys most modern organizations, scaling cooperation. As groups grew larger, instead of becoming more hierarchical and bureaucratic, they became more networked and flexible. They developed what complexity scientists now call distributed leadership. Different people taking charge based on context and expertise rather than fixed authority. The genius of their system was redundancy without waste. Multiple people knew every critical skill, but they specialized based on talent and interest. Everyone could make basic tools, but master craftspeople created the finest work. Everyone could gather plants, but plant specialists knew the most productive locations and techniques. Everyone could hunt, but expert hunters led the most challenging expeditions. This distributed expertise created what modern military strategists call graceful degradation. When you lose specialists, the system doesn't collapse. It just operates at reduced efficiency until new specialists can be trained. It's the difference between a pyramid, which collapses if you remove the top, and a web, which remains functional even when parts are damaged. The social technologies of Ice Age humans weren't primitive versions of modern institutions. In many ways, they were more advanced. They'd solved problems we're still working on. How do you maintain cooperation without coercion? How do you encourage innovation while preserving knowledge? How do you distribute resources fairly without destroying incentives? How do you make decisions that consider both individual needs and collective welfare. Their solutions were elegant, tested by millennia of success, and perfectly adapted to human psychology and small group dynamics. We abandoned these solutions not because they didn't work, but because they didn't scale to agricultural civilizations with thousands of people. But now, with global communication networks and distributed technologies, maybe we can learn from our ancestors again. The Ice Age humans who painted caves and carved Venus figurines and built mammoth bone houses weren't just surviving, they were thriving. They were creating art and music and stories. They were falling in love and raising children and caring for elders. They were living fully human lives in impossible conditions because they'd mastered the ultimate survival technology: each other. Every human alive today carries the genetic and cultural legacy of these master cooperators. We exist because our ancestors were better at working together than any other species in Earth's history. The question now is whether we can remember those lessons before we forget how to be truly human together. In the frozen darkness of the Ice Age, when death lurked behind every shadow and survival hung by the thinnest threads, humans discovered something that no other species ever has: that together we are not just the sum of our parts. We are something greater, something that can turn scarcity into abundance, and weakness into strength, and the harshest world imaginable into home. The mammoth bone houses crumble, the cave paintings fade, the stone tools weather away, but the social technologies that enabled Ice Age humans to conquer impossible odds, those live on in every moment. We choose cooperation over competition, community over isolation, and shared humanity over individual survival. The real masterpiece our ancestors left us wasn't carved in stone or painted on walls. Now we enter the truly astonishing chapter of Ice Age ingenuity. While we've marveled at their bedding systems, their architectural mastery with mammoth bones, and their revolutionary clothing technology, there's one innovation that towers above all others in its sophistication and impact. This wasn't just survival technology. This was the birth of human dominance over the natural world. Picture this: 40,000 years ago, in what would one day become Germany, a craftsman sits by firelight, carefully selecting pieces of wood with the precision of a modern engineer. But he's not building furniture or shelter. He's creating something that will fundamentally alter the balance of power between humans and every other living thing on Earth. In his hands, bent wood becomes stored energy, physics becomes weaponry, and humanity takes its first step toward ecological supremacy. The bow and arrow wasn't just another tool, it was a revolution wrapped in sinew and wood, a technology so transformative that it would echo through every subsequent human achievement. But here's what makes this story truly incredible. The archaeological evidence shows that Ice Age humans didn't just stumble upon this breakthrough. They engineered it with mathematical precision that wouldn't be formally understood for another 40,000 years. These aren't crude projectiles hastily carved from available materials. Each arrowhead weighs exactly 3 grams, a specification so precise that modern Olympic archery equipment follows similar principles. The balance point, the aerodynamic profile, the weight distribution, every aspect was calculated for maximum efficiency. Finding these artifacts was like discovering a laptop in a pyramid, Dr. LePage admits, her voice carrying the wonder of someone who has spent decades studying human innovation. Neanderthals were still using thrusting spears, weapons that required closing to contact range with prey that had evolved specifically to kill anything that came that close. These humans brought death from 50 meters away. But the bow's true genius wasn't just in its lethality, it was in how it multiplied human potential across every demographic. Before projectile weapons, hunting was a young man's game. You needed the strength to wrestle mammoth to the ground, the speed to chase down reindeer, the reflexes to dodge charging aurochs. Success rates hovered around 10%, and survival rates for hunters were questionable at best. Every Neanderthal skeleton tells the story of this brutal equation: broken bones from wrestling prey to death, rodeo rider trauma from a lifetime of close quarters, combat with creatures designed to kill. The bow changed everything overnight. Suddenly, a 100-pound human drawing a 50-pound bow could deliver 200 pounds of impact force. Children could become lethal hunters. Women could defend camps single-handedly. Elderly craftsmen, instead of becoming burdens, could contribute calories rather than consuming them. The demographics of survival shifted in a single generation. Dr. Ludovic Slimak, analyzing the Mandarin site, has identified something even more remarkable: specialized ammunition. We found points for birds, others for rabbits, others clearly designed for larger game. Each point required understanding ballistics that wouldn't be formalized until the Renaissance. Too heavy, and arrows drop short. Too light, and they lack penetration. Wrong balance point, and they tumble mid-flight. The Mandarin points are aerodynamically perfect. The manufacturing process reveals the true sophistication of Ice Age technology. Bow wood required specific moisture content, precise seasoning time, and mathematical understanding of stress dynamics. Strings demanded fiber processing, spinning techniques, and tensile strength calculations that modern materials science would recognize. Arrows needed straight shafts with consistent diameter and perfect spine flex. Fletching required understanding spin stabilization and air resistance. Each component was worthless alone, but revolutionary together. This wasn't simple tool making. This was systems engineering 45,000 years before the term existed, and the social implications were even more staggering than the technical ones. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals saw this technology and attempted to copy it. Late Neanderthal sites contain experimental points, crude attempts at composite tools, evidence of a species desperately trying to adapt to a new paradigm. But copying complex technology isn't like copying stone knapping techniques. Without understanding the full technical package, bow mechanics, string materials, aerophysics, release technique, ballistic principles, the individual pieces were just oddly shaped rocks. It's like showing someone a car when they've only known walking, explains Dr. Slimak. Neanderthals had 200,000 years of thrusting spear tradition. Abandoning what had worked for millennia in favor of untested technology required a leap of faith they couldn't make. But the bow's most revolutionary aspect wasn't technical, it was psychological. For the first time in evolutionary history, humans could kill without risk. Ambush hunting became assassination. One archer could control an entire valley. 10 archers could depopulate a migration route. The landscape of death expanded from arm's reach to arrow's flight. We weren't just hunting anymore. We were conducting warfare against the natural world from a position of absolute safety. The evidence is written in cave art. Pre-bow paintings show humans fleeing animals, hiding, cowering before the giants of the Pleistocene. Post-bow art reveals a fundamental shift in perspective. Humans dominating animals, creatures pierced with multiple arrows, hunters standing casually as prey dies at distance. The predator prey relationship had inverted completely. Perhaps most remarkably, this technology worked on humans too. While we don't find direct evidence of Neanderthal sapiens warfare, the timing is suspicious. Neanderthals began disappearing from regions immediately after bow technology arrived. If someone's shooting at you from distances you can't retaliate from, do you fight or relocate? The archaeological record suggests most chose relocation, retreating to increasingly marginal territories until retreat was no longer possible. The bow created humanity's first arms race. Longer ranges demanded better materials. Better materials enabled faster arrows. Faster arrows required advanced fletching. By 20,000 years ago, arrow technology would shame modern carbon fiber attempts. Archaeologists thus have found arrows that flew true for 100 meters, penetrating hide that stops bullets. But perhaps the most touching evidence of the bow's importance comes from the smallest artifacts, children's bows. At Grotte Mandren, archaeologists discovered training weapons scaled 30% smaller than adult versions, perfect proportions, working strings, blunt practice arrows. Someone spent weeks crafting these tools for 6-year-olds, teaching them that distance equals safety, that technology beats biology, that the world bends to those who understand its physical laws. This wasn't just tool making, this was education in human superiority. Each child learned that they didn't need to evolve stronger muscles or sharper teeth. They could simply invent better solutions. The bow didn't just change hunting, it changed what it meant to be human, from participants in nature's struggle to its choreographers, from subjects of evolution to its masters. The psychological impact reverberates through every subsequent human achievement. Every missile, every bullet, every drone strike traces its lineage back to that first bent stick storing energy in a German cave. We've traded bows for ballistics, arrows for artillery, but the principle remains unchanged. Why engage when you can eliminate from safety? Why evolve when you can invent? 54,000 years later, we're still firing descendants of that first arrow, still choosing distance over engagement, still proving that bent wood could store energy, stored energy could be released on demand, and released energy could defeat anything evolution had spent millions of years perfecting. The bow wasn't just humanity's declaration of independence from ecological rules. It was our first shot in a war against biological limitations that we're still fighting and winning. Every time we choose technology over adaptation, engineering over evolution, invention over natural selection, we're honoring those Ice Age craftsmen who looked at a stick and saw stored energy. They couldn't have known they were creating the foundation for everything from catapults to spacecraft. They just knew that bent wood beat strong muscles, that distance conquered danger, that human intelligence could outmaneuver any predator's instincts. In teaching their children to draw bowstrings, they were teaching them to bend reality itself. The first arrow fired in that German cave wasn't just aimed at prey, it was aimed at the future. Here's part 7 of the 9-part script, written in the style of the reference materials and focusing on Ice Age sleeping innovations. But here's where the story gets absolutely mind-blowing. While we're obsessing over mammoth hunts and cave paintings, Our Ice Age ancestors were solving humanity's most fundamental problem. How do you sleep when the outside temperature can literally kill you in minutes? How do you rest when saber-toothed cats are prowling outside your shelter? How do you maintain body heat through Arctic nights that lasted months? The answer wasn't just survival, it was engineering. Picture this. You're in Siberia 25,000 years ago. The temperature outside is minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. There's no central heating, no electric blankets, no down comforters shipped from REI. Just you, your family, and the brutal mathematics of thermodynamics. One mistake, one night of inadequate insulation, and your fossil material. But here's what archaeologists discovered that changes everything we thought we knew about Ice Age ingenuity. These people weren't just throwing animal skins on the ground and hoping for the best. They were creating thermal engineering systems that would make modern camping enthusiasts weep with envy. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, researchers uncovered something that stopped them cold, literally. A 26,000-year-old sleeping area that wasn't just sophisticated, it was revolutionary. Multiple layers of carefully selected materials, each chosen for specific thermal properties. Reindeer fur for the base layer, positioned with the hair facing down to create air pockets. Arctic fox fur for the middle layer, oriented to trap warm air. And on top, specially prepared mammoth hide, treated with a mixture of brain matter and bone marrow that created a waterproof yet breathable outer shell. This wasn't random layering. This was materials science. Dr. Olga Soffer, who spent decades analyzing these sleeping systems, puts it bluntly. These people understood heat transfer better than most modern engineers. Every layer had a purpose. Every material was selected for maximum thermal efficiency. But the real breakthrough wasn't the materials, it was the mathematics. See, human bodies generate about 100 watts of heat at rest. That's roughly equivalent to a bright light bulb. In normal conditions, that's plenty to keep you warm. But at minus 40, you're losing heat faster than you can produce it. The solution? Multiply the heat sources. Ice Age families didn't sleep alone. They slept in carefully orchestrated thermal clusters, adults on the outside, children in the center, bodies positioned to maximize shared warmth while minimizing heat loss. They'd discovered what modern survival experts call buddy warming, except they'd perfected it to an art form. At Pinsevent in France, archaeologists found sleeping areas arranged in precise patterns, not random family groups, but calculated thermal arrangements. Pregnant women positioned near the fire but not too close. Elderly members placed where they could benefit from multiple body heat sources. Children nestled between adults in configurations that would make modern pediatric hypothermia specialists nod in approval. The sleeping surfaces themselves were marvels of prehistoric engineering. At Ohelo the Secum in Israel, researchers discovered 23,000-year-old bedding that would shame most modern camping gear. Grass bundles arranged in overlapping patterns, each layer designed to trap air while providing cushioning. The grass wasn't random either. They'd selected specific species based on their insulation properties and resistance to compression. But here's where it gets really incredible. Chemical analysis of these ancient sleeping areas revealed something that took archaeologists decades to understand. The grass wasn't just bedding, it was a natural pesticide system. They'd chosen plants that naturally repel insects, ticks and parasites, sedge grass for the base layer, which contains compounds that deter biting insects, leaves from the camphor bush, still used today in traditional medicine for its insect repelling properties. Even the arrangement was strategic, overlapping layers that created chemical barriers while maintaining thermal efficiency. Dr. Lynn Wadley from the University of the Witwatersrand made a discovery that redefined everything we thought we knew about Ice Age intelligence. At Border Cave in South Africa, she found 200,000-year-old bedding systems that included deliberate ash layers, not random ash from old fires, but carefully applied ash barriers designed to kill insects and parasites. The genius is in the chemistry. Ash blocks the breathing apparatus of insects and eventually dehydrates them. It's a natural pesticide that requires zero technology beyond controlled fire, but using it effectively requires understanding insect biology, knowing which ash works best, and timing the application correctly. These weren't desperate people making do with whatever they could find. These were problem solvers who'd identified every threat to comfortable sleep and engineered solutions that address them systematically. The thermal properties get even more sophisticated when you examine the details. At Mezmaiskaya Cave in Russia, sleeping areas show evidence of radiant heating systems. Stones heated by the fire during the day, then carefully positioned around sleeping areas to provide warmth through the night. The rocks weren't random either. They'd selected stones with high thermal mass that would release heat slowly and steadily. Some sleeping areas show evidence of primitive but effective ventilation systems. Air gaps positioned to allow fresh oxygen while preventing heat loss. Draft barriers made from specially prepared hides. Even humidity control using absorbent materials to prevent condensation that could freeze and create deadly cold spots. But perhaps the most impressive innovation was modularity. These weren't permanent beds, but adaptable systems that could be reconfigured based on conditions. Colder nights meant tighter clustering and additional layers. Warmer periods allowed for more spacing and lighter covering. Sick or injured members could be positioned for optimal care while maintaining thermal efficiency for the group. The archaeology reveals something else that's absolutely staggering. These sleeping systems were maintained across generations. Evidence from some sites shows the same sleeping areas being used, improved, and refined over thousands of years. Knowledge passed down, not just through demonstration, but through active innovation. Each generation adding improvements, testing new materials, refining the thermal engineering. At Sungir in Russia, a 34,000-year-old burial revealed sleeping gear so sophisticated it took modern researchers years to understand its construction. Sewn sleeping bags made from multiple fur types, each positioned for specific thermal properties. Insulation that varied in thickness based on body heat distribution patterns. Even foot warmers, pouches filled with heated stones and positioned to prevent frostbite. The social organization required for these sleeping systems reveals intelligence that goes far beyond individual survival. Someone had to coordinate the gathering of materials. Someone had to understand the thermal properties of different furs and how they work together. Someone had to teach the construction techniques and ensure quality control. This wasn't just survival, this was civilization. Modern sleeping bag manufacturers study these Ice Age innovations, the layering principles, the material selections, the thermal management techniques. They're all based on discoveries made by people who couldn't write down their formulas, but understood heat transfer at a molecular level. Dr. Ian Gilligan from the University of Sydney spent years reconstructing Ice Age sleeping systems. His conclusion is humbling. In terms of thermal efficiency per unit weight, these prehistoric sleeping systems outperformed anything we produced until the late 20th century. The most sophisticated sleeping systems weren't found in the warmest climates, but in the most challenging ones. The harshest conditions produce the most innovative solutions. Arctic sites reveal sleeping gear that could maintain core body temperature in conditions that would overwhelm modern equipment. But the real breakthrough wasn't technological, it was psychological. These sleeping systems didn't just provide physical comfort, they created social bonds that held communities together through impossible conditions. Shared warmth meant shared survival. Cooperative thermal management meant cooperative everything else. When you're literally depending on someone else's body heat to survive the night, individual versus group interests disappear. You succeed together or you freeze separately. The sleeping arrangements that kept Ice Age families alive also created the social structures that would eventually build civilizations. Every night, for thousands of years, our ancestors solved the fundamental equation of human survival: how to maintain life in conditions designed to end it. They didn't just solve it, they mastered it so completely that their solutions remained unimproved for 25,000 years. The next time you adjust your thermostat or pull up an electric blanket, remember this: you're using technology that makes survival easier, but not necessarily better. Our Ice Age ancestors, sleeping on engineered grass mattresses under carefully layered furs, generated more body heat, slept more soundly, and woke up more rested than most modern humans ever will. They turned the simple act of sleep into a masterpiece of thermal engineering, social cooperation, and survival innovation. The flickering torch casts shadows on limestone walls as the young mother adjusts her position by the fire, feeling the familiar ache in her lower back. Around her, 27 members of her band sleep fitfully on their carefully prepared bedding, layers of sedge grass topped with aromatic leaves that keep the insects at bay. But she cannot sleep, not tonight. The contractions have been building for hours, and she knows her time has come. Welcome to perhaps the most crucial moment in Ice Age survival: childbirth in the Paleolithic world, where bringing new life into existence required not just courage, but an entire community's accumulated wisdom about life, death, and everything in between. We've explored how our ancestors conquered the cold, mastered fire, and outlasted giants. But perhaps their greatest triumph wasn't over mammoths or climate. It was ensuring the next generation survived to carry humanity forward. Tonight, in this cave that has sheltered families for countless generations, we witness the moment that made all other achievements possible: the birth of hope itself. The midwife, a woman whose own childbearing years ended a decade ago, kneels beside the laboring mother with practiced calm. Her hands, weathered by 40 winters of survival, carry knowledge passed down through generations of successful births. She knows which plants ease pain, how to position a struggling infant, when to worry and when to wait. In a world without hospitals or medical schools, she is professor, surgeon, and guardian angel combined. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe reveals the sophisticated understanding our ancestors had of childbirth and infant care. At Dolny Vestonice, researchers found what appears to be a birthing area, a specially prepared space near the hearth with soft materials and evidence of medicinal plant use. These weren't random arrangements, but carefully designed environments that maximized the chances of both mother and child surviving this most dangerous passage. The contractions intensify, and the mother grips a piece of mammoth ivory carved smooth by countless hands before hers. This birthing tool, found at multiple Paleolithic sites, served both practical and spiritual purposes. Its surface polished by the sweat and tears of women who had labored here before, it connected her to an unbroken chain of mothers stretching back to humanity's beginning. As dawn approaches and the labor progresses, something remarkable happens. The entire band awakens, not from noise. Ice Age mothers learn to birth quietly to avoid attracting predators, but from an almost supernatural awareness that new life is arriving. Children are gently moved to the cave's far end while the elder women gather around their laboring sister. The men maintain the fire and stand guard, their usual hunting roles transformed into protective vigilance. This communal response to childbirth wasn't sentimentality, but survival strategy. In a world where every person mattered, where the loss of even one individual could doom the entire group, birth was everyone's business. Modern hospitals, with their sterile isolation, would have baffled our ancestors, who understood that bringing life into the world required the full strength of the community. The moment arrives with the sunrise. After hours of struggle, a cry pierces the morning air, not the mother's, but her newborn daughter's first protest against the cold world she's entered. The midwife quickly clears the infant's airways with techniques that wouldn't look out of place in a modern delivery room, then places the baby on her mother's chest for that crucial first contact. But survival is just beginning. In the Ice Age, approximately half of all children died before reaching adulthood. This harsh mathematics meant that every birth was both celebration and gamble, every infant both precious hope and heartbreaking uncertainty. The band would invest everything in this child's survival, but they also knew that loving her meant accepting the possibility of losing her. The aftercare reveals the depth of Paleolithic medical knowledge. The midwife uses specific plant preparations to help expel the placenta, applies moss with natural antibiotic properties to prevent infection, and monitors both mother and child for signs of complications. The placenta itself isn't discarded, but buried in a special location. Some sites show evidence of placental burial grounds, suggesting spiritual beliefs about the connection between birth, death, and rebirth. As the new mother rests with her daughter, the band begins preparations that will shape this child's entire existence. A cradle board is crafted from carefully selected materials, soft furs, waterproof hides, and aromatic woods that repel insects. This isn't just baby furniture, but survival technology designed to keep an infant alive in conditions that would challenge any modern parent. The infant's first feeding brings another crucial element into focus: the role of the extended family in child survival. While the biological mother provides primary nutrition, other lactating women in the band stand ready to nurse if needed. This communal nursing system, evidenced by isotope analysis of ancient teeth, meant that no infant would starve simply because their mother couldn't produce enough milk. Perhaps most remarkably, the community immediately begins the process of cultural transmission that will turn this vulnerable infant into a capable adult. The lullabies sung aren't just comfort, but education, songs that encode crucial survival information about plants, animals, and seasonal patterns. The toys crafted aren't mere entertainment, but training tools designed to develop the skills she'll need to survive. The naming ceremony, conducted when the infant shows signs of thriving, reveals another layer of Ice Age sophistication. Based on evidence from burial goods and artistic representations, children weren't given permanent names immediately, but earned them through survival milestones. This practice acknowledged the harsh reality that not every birth would result in a viable adult, while still celebrating the potential each new life represented. As days turn to weeks, the infant's care becomes a masterclass in prehistoric child rearing. She's kept close to her mother's body for warmth and protection, carried in specially designed slings that allow mobility while maintaining crucial contact. When the band moves to follow seasonal resources, she travels safely secured to her mother's back, experiencing the rhythms of nomadic life from her first weeks. The feeding schedule follows patterns that modern pediatricians would recognize as optimal. Breast milk provides not just nutrition, but crucial antibodies against the diseases that threaten infant survival. When solid foods are introduced around 6 months, they're carefully selected and prepared, pre chewed by adults to aid digestion, chosen for their nutritional density and digestibility. Sleep arrangements reflect the deep understanding our ancestors had of infant needs. The baby sleeps between her parents, benefiting from their body heat while being protected from rolling or smothering by specially designed barriers. This co sleeping arrangement, criticized by some modern authorities, was essential for survival in environments where a few degrees of temperature could mean death. Perhaps most touching are the toys and entertainment devices created for Ice Age infants. Carved rattles filled with seeds, miniature animals crafted from clay, even simple mobiles made from feathers and bones. These artifacts show that even in humanity's harshest era, adults understood that children needed more than just food and shelter. They needed stimulation, beauty, and play. The infant's first winter tests every aspect of the survival system. Wrapped in carefully layered furs, kept close to the fire, protected from drafts by strategic positioning within the cave, she represents the ultimate collaboration between human ingenuity and natural resources. Every element of her care has been refined through generations of trial and error, success and heartbreaking failure. As she grows stronger and more alert, the signs of her developing personality begin to emerge. Ice Age parents, like their modern counterparts, watched for early indicators of their child's temperament and abilities. Was she curious about her surroundings? Did she respond well to music? Did she show signs of the manual dexterity that would be crucial for tool making? These observations would guide her education and role within the community. The milestone of her first solid food, likely a mixture of mammoth marrow and plant pulp pre-chewed by her mother, marks not just nutritional transition, but social integration. She's no longer purely dependent on her mother's body, but begins participating in the communal food system that sustains the entire band. By her first birthday, marked not by calendar, but by developmental milestones, she has become a full member of the community. She recognizes voices, responds to her name, and shows preferences for certain people and activities. More importantly, she has survived the most dangerous year of life in humanity's most dangerous era. The investment in her survival extends beyond immediate family to the entire band structure. Grandmothers, those repositories of crucial knowledge, take special interest in her development. Aunts and uncles contribute resources and protection. Even unrelated band members recognize that her survival strengthens the group's future prospects. Her second year brings new challenges and opportunities. Now mobile, she must be protected from the countless dangers of Ice Age life while being allowed enough freedom to develop essential skills. The balance between safety and education requires constant vigilance from multiple adults, creating an intensive supervision system that would exhaust modern parents. Language development accelerates as she's exposed to the rich verbal traditions of her people. The stories told around the evening fire aren't just entertainment, but curriculum, encoding survival information in memorable narratives. Songs teach seasonal patterns, plant identification, and animal behavior. Even casual conversation provides lessons in social interaction and cultural values. By age 3, she begins participating in simple tasks, gathering easily identified plants, helping prepare hides, carrying small items during moves. These aren't chores imposed on a child, but opportunities to practice adult skills in safe environments. Every task is both education and contribution, preparing her for eventual independence while acknowledging her current value to the community. The transition from complete dependency to gradual autonomy reflects the deep understanding our ancestors had of child development. They recognized that pushing too hard too fast could break a child's spirit, while protecting too much could leave them unprepared for adult responsibilities. The balance they achieved produced adults capable of surviving conditions that would challenge any modern human. As our young survivor enters her 4th year, she embodies the triumph of Ice Age child rearing. Fed on mammoth milk and raised by the combined wisdom of her community, she carries forward not just genes, but culture. The accumulated knowledge that allowed humanity to outlast giants, survive climate chaos, and spread across the globe. Her existence proves that even in Earth's harshest conditions, humans found ways to nurture the next generation. She is living testimony to the power of community, the importance of accumulated wisdom, and the unbreakable determination of parents to give their children better lives than their own. Tonight, as she sleeps safely between her parents in their carefully prepared bedding, she doesn't know that she represents one of evolution's greatest achievements. She's simply a child, loved and protected, growing stronger each day in preparation for the challenges and opportunities that await her. But we know better. We know that her survival required the coordination of an entire community, the application of sophisticated medical knowledge, and the dedication of adults willing to sacrifice everything for the next generation. She is the future made flesh, hope given form, the living proof that even in the darkest times, humanity's greatest instinct isn't for conquest or domination, it's for love. Looking at your existing script and reference materials, I can see you've created a comprehensive journey through Ice Age survival that culminates powerfully. For Part 9, you need a conclusion that brings together all the sophisticated sleeping technologies while delivering a final, memorable insight. Here's a script that matches your established tone and style. Throughout the Ice Age, Our ancestors demonstrated extraordinary technological innovation beyond primitive stereotypes, developing sophisticated sleep systems with layered materials like sedge grass, insect repellent leaves, animal hides, and even composite clay adhesives, enabling safe, comfortable, and hygienic rest in extreme climates. Crafting advanced architectural structures from mammoth bones with integrated thermal and environmental controls, pioneering social networks, trade, and cooperation that fostered long term survival, inventing projectile weapons like bows and arrows with precise engineering that extended hunting ranges and redefined predator prey dynamics, and mastering childbirth and child rearing through communal care, medicinal plant knowledge, and personalized adaptable sleeping arrangements, collectively forming a foundation of innovation, social cohesion, and environmental mastery that allowed humanity to thrive in the harshest conditions, laying the groundwork for civilization, cultural expression, and ultimately the dominance of our species.